Hey Gecko and Isopod fans, this is Wally with Supreme Gecko, and today we're talking about one of my favorite genuses, Goniurosaurus. That's the common cave gecko. And specifically we're talking about Goniurosaurus bawanglingensis. Isn't there a Kid Rock song about Goniurosaurus bawanglingensis? Now take a look at these geckos. All of these are cave geckos. This is the common cave gecko, Goniurosaurus bawanglingensis. But this is a cave gecko as well. And this is a cave gecko. And this is a cave gecko. Now we all know about the common cave geckos, Goniurosaurus bawanglingensis. They've been in the hobby for quite some time, and you occasionally see them at reptile shows and pet stores. But did you know that there's actually 22 other species of cave geckos? Hold on a minute.
10 seconds later.
Okay, now there's 25 other species, 26 total species of Goniurosaurus. There's a lot of similarities between these different species. They all live about 10 to 12 years. They all are pretty handleable, but they are shy and secretive, so they don't like to be handled that often and that long. They are insectivores. They like to eat insects, and they are crepuscular. They're more active during the dawn and dusk hours, and they're nocturnal. They're very active at night. But of all the species of Goniurosaurus, there are some major differences. One is location. Some are found in China, some Vietnam, and some in Japan. These different species have all kinds of different colors, and I tell you what, the difference between a baby Goniurosaurus and an adult is amazing. Take a look at those eyes. Another difference is that they're sometimes available in the hobby, especially the common cave gecko, and maybe the gecko that we're going to be talking about today, Bawanglingensis, but the other species are very, very difficult to find in the hobby. Another big difference with all of these species of cave geckos is size, from the very small Goniurosaurus orientalis, I know it has a new name now, which get to be about 5 inches in length, all the way up to the huge Godzilla size Goniurosaurus lui and Goniurosaurus arenus. So let's talk about Goniurosaurus bawanglingensis specifically and their care. These animals will do well in a 15-gallon enclosure, about 24 by 12 inches in length, but they'll do better in a 20-long enclosure, 30 by 12 inches. We've kept about 12 different species of cave geckos, and we started keeping them in plastic tubs for a long, long time, but we've switched over to PVC enclosures just like this one right here. You can also keep them in glass. The one thing that you do not want to do with these animals is keep them in screen enclosures. As far as decor, give them lots and lots of hiding spaces, lots of branches. Make sure the branches are mixed size, at least as wide as they need to hold them, and bigger. Make sure that those branches are not slick plastic branches, and you can also add plastic plants and cork bark, especially cork rounds. Oh, and here's a fact that a lot of people don't realize about cave geckos. They live by the river and they like to climb on rocks. So include some kind of a limestone type of rock in your enclosure so they can grip and climb that rock. Cave geckos do require a higher humidity, and the best way to provide that is through a good substrate. Our favorite substrate mix is 80% koi fiber or a jungle mix, 10% peat moss, and 10% of a cheap play sand. Make that depth about 2 to 3 inches and you're all set. You'll also need some sphagnum moss in the enclosure as well, but again, we'll talk about that in just a moment when we talk about breeding. For enclosure about the size of a 20-gallon long, you can keep multiple animals together, but never, ever, ever multiple males. Goniurosaurus bawanglingensis comes from the Hainan Islands. Let's take a look at the maps. Remember, at higher elevations, you're going to have higher humidity in jungle areas, and you're also going to have cooler temperatures as well. Let's just make this super easy. If your enclosure is set in the 70s, you're going to be okay. But make sure you have a warm area, a warm spot of about 20% of the enclosure set at the high 70s or 80 degrees. If your enclosure is in the 60s, it's too cold. If you can, drop the temperature 4 to 6 degrees at night, and if you can, go through a brumation with these animals in the winter where you can drop the temperature 6 to 8 degrees. You can provide these heat sources either with an under the tank heater with a thermometer or an over the tank incandescent light. Speaking of lighting, again, these animals are crepuscular and nocturnal, so you don't really need to focus on lighting. UV lighting is beneficial but not necessary as long as you're using a calcium with D3 powder to dust your insects. Provide lighting suitable for your viewing pleasure. Let's talk about cave gecko foods. Cave geckos are insectivores, so you have to provide some kind of an insect source for them. We feed our cave geckos every 2 to 3 days, and their favorite food by far is crickets. You can feed them dubias as well, and you can feed mealworms, but they don't prefer mealworms or dubias over crickets. You can provide these feeder insects through a mealworm cup, even crickets, as they'll stay in the cup for a long time if they're dusted. Always dust your feeder insects with a calcium with D3 powder and a vitamin powder mixed in. And we always prefer to gut load our insects before feeding them about a day before. Let's talk about misting. Misting is super important. We mist 2 to 3 times a week, a gentle spray of their enclosure. Don't forget to add a water bowl as well because they will drink from the water bowl. Let's move on to my favorite subject about geckos, breeding. Breeding is really super easy with Goniurosaurus bawanglingensis. They do take about 1.5 to 2 years to mature. We always wait 2 years before we start introducing males to females and start the breeding process. How do you tell a boy from a girl? Let's take a look. Here are the differences. I've never had a problem introducing a male to a female. You shouldn't either. After introduction, if the conditions are suitable, the female will start laying eggs, and she'll continue to lay eggs up to 4 to 5 batches of 2 eggs a time every 30 to 45 days. Here's a really important fact about how to breed these Goniurosaurus. Make sure that you have a suitable breeding area. We prefer having a hide with the substrate underneath the hide packed with some sphagnum moss. That will keep that hide area really super high in humidity. As well, we wet that substrate underneath that hide, and that's where 99% of the time they're going to lay their eggs. So gently sift through the substrate under that hide and you're going to find those 2 eggs. A quick note, you might want to separate the males and the females during the wintertime just to give the females a little bit of a rest period. Egg incubation takes about 60 days. We take those 2 eggs, we put them into an egg hatching box filled with some peat moss that's slightly wet. We'll check on that peat moss throughout the 60 days of incubation time to make sure it maintains that moisture for the eggs. We'll put that hide box into the incubator and incubate at about 80 to 82 degrees. Again, about 60 days later, you have hatchlings, and that's the fun part, isn't it? So now what do? You have baby cave geckos. Well, let's make this part easy as well. Set them up almost exactly like the adults as far as decoration and substrate and heat. Here's an example of how we set up the babies. You can see that we have a couple of hides. We have the sphagnum moss to keep the enclosure humid. We have a food dish, a water dish, and we keep it fairly simple like this. We have a strict schedule of feeding every other day these cave gecko babies, and we'll feed them baby mealworms, baby crickets, and especially baby dubias. They love baby dubias. One of the keys about raising babies is make sure that you're constantly checking for males and separate them out from the group if you keep multiple cave gecko babies together. I'm really trying to cover as much information about Goniurosaurus and especially Goniurosaurus bawanglingensis as I possibly can in this video, but there's a couple of great resources that you can go to. One is Reptiles. I'm going to share the link in the description. Another great source is goniurosaurus.de. There's a German version and an English version translation of this website. Lots of great information. Make sure that you visit those. As you know, I love keeping these rarer geckos, especially these cave geckos. You can see other rare geckos in some of my other videos. I'll share a link right here and see some amazing rare geckos. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next video.